Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello and welcome back to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients. I'm your host, Amelia Fruby. I am the founder of Softer Sounds Podcast Studio, and here on this show, I share stories, strategies, and experiments for growing your business with radical generosity and energetic sovereignty. If you are tuned in when this comes out, happy June. I am so glad that the month of summer is upon us, and also a little sad that season 3 of Off the Grid will soon be coming to an end. So stay tuned this month because I have a very exciting big announcement coming about a fun new thing that I'll be doing with Off the Grid this summer. But until we get there, I also have a fun, exciting episode for you today. So today on the show, I am joined by Cody Cook-Parrott. Cody Cook-Parrott is a dancer and writer whose work focuses on the self, devotion, ritual, creativity, and art making. Their practice is rooted in improvisation as a compositional form that takes shape in movement videos, books, quilting, online courses, and hosting artists. Cody received a BFA in dance from the University of Michigan and is currently getting their MFA in interdisciplinary arts at the University of Nevada. They've written 2 books, Getting to Center, Pathways to Finding Yourself Within the Great Unknown, and How to Not Always Be Working. They also have a podcast called Common Shapes that Softer Sounds produces, and they write a newsletter that comes out every Monday called Monday Monday. In fact, you might very well be listening to this podcast because Cody recommended it in that newsletter. So thank you, Cody. Thank you, listeners. I'm so happy to have everyone here. In my conversation with Cody, we begin by kind of tracking this journey, this archive of their work on Instagram over the past 10 years. And we kind of highlight how they grew their platform, then how that sort of shifted and led them to write a zine in 2018 called How a Photo and Video Sharing Social Networking Service Gave Me My Best Friends, True Love, a Beautiful Career, and Made Me Want to Die. We pause there and discuss what happened with that, and then continue to explore why they stayed on Instagram even when feeling that way, what led them to deactivate for 4 months in 2021, what led them to say they were saying goodbye forever last fall, and then also why they are back on Instagram. In this conversation, Cody and I met really deep in the both and of when being on social media feels bad and being off social media feels bad, and what we do when that's the case. And we also unpack what happens when we think that leaving social media might solve a lot of our problems, and then we do it and it doesn't. So this is a really beautiful episode about creative business, about sharing your offerings, about changing in public, about sharing your political values and beliefs with the world. And then at the end, we even have a whole conversation about Substack and Cody's shift from Instagram to Substack and feelings about the relationship between those two. So this conversation feels very much like 2 natal Venus and Gemini are hanging out and just chatting. So you'll hear that. I hope you enjoy the vibe shift. I hope you enjoy this conversation. And without further ado, let's dive in to this episode with Cody Cook-Parrott. One more quick note before we begin. 10 days after we recorded this conversation, Cody decided to leave Instagram again, and they're currently off the app. So just know that we are all on this spiralic journey of reassessing our relationship to social media, and it's totally okay to change your mind again and again and again. All right, enjoy the episode. Hi, Cody. Welcome to Off the Grid.
Thank you for having me on my favorite podcast. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. I wanted to start out on a bit of a sentimental note, which is to say that there would be no Off the Grid if you had not been writing about your relationship to social media so openly and publicly. And I really appreciate this archive that you've really left or constructed for a long time now, sharing about your relationship with social media and inviting all of us to reflect on ours.
It's so interesting, like, hearing you say that, I'm immediately struck with, like, both, like, the beauty of that and, like, a grief in it to be like, "Oh, yeah, I, like, didn't necessarily stay the path and have had these, ins and outs and ups and downs." But at the same time, I'm excited to talk about all of them today, and I arrive here with very little shame or guilt or about the path, which I think is important to say. So, I'm excited to, yeah, like, look at where the experiments went wrong or went a different way than I thought, and where I have some acceptance of it at the same time. But I'm happy to hear that, and happy as as we'll talk about, still somewhat using social media. It's interesting to see all these other people who have like gotten off for good because of me and be like, okay, what does this mean exactly? So yeah, we'll see.
I really appreciate actually that we can both come to this conversation from different places and relationships to social media.
Yeah.
And I know that among listeners, many of them are still on social media or they've taken breaks or they've left and returned. And, my hope for this space is that it's just always a space where we live in that questioning and where we're willing to ask ourselves if we want to be on social media right now or ever. And I see you as someone who's just really been leading us all in that work of the questioning. And I don't honestly care about the answer.
No attachment to the answer. Yeah.
Yeah. For folks who may be new to your work, I think a lot of people listening will be familiar, but I also want to take us back and help people kind of go on this journey with you, the journey I've been following. Could you share a little bit about the growth of your Instagram from the beginning, like having Have Company?
Yeah, I love this, like, let's do the history.
Yeah. It's a genealogical
Yes,
process I'm doing
exactly.
here.
I used to have a shop, gallery, and artist residency in Grand Rapids, Michigan called Have Company, and it started in a camper that I had gutted and turned into, like, a little mobile shop in 2012. So I started using Instagram in 2012, which is crazy. That was 12 years ago. And Instagram used to do this thing back in the day where they would like feature you. Like you would be like a featured user. And so I had grown my Instagram following to maybe like 5,000. And that was just from like who I was carrying in the store, and people would repost it, and, people would tag the shop and come into the shop. And it was sort of in that era of like shops were really cool. It was like Otherwild had just started about a year before me, like just a lot of cool other like queer handmade goods shops were sort of in the mix. And then Instagram featured me, and I like went up to like 20,000 or something. And it was a really big deal. There's no lying that having that K next to the number just looked good, and people thought that was fancy, and it made me seem reputable. And that was the place where when I opened up the artist residency and had people applying, people wanted access to the following that Have Company had. And Have Company wanted access to the followings of the artists who were coming. And, I don't think it's bad to want to like build community with other people with followings, but that was a reality of like, yeah, I was, inviting people who really had also sort of like developed a following on social media. And so that's sort of the beginning story of Have Company and Instagram. And that technically my account that is now just Cody Cook-Parrott is the same account.
Yeah. When did you make the transition from Have Company to the account just being your name?
So I had the shop till 2016, and then that's when I moved to California, and it was sometime after that, a year or two after that, that I switched the name.
And so through that process, that's where we get you're making your best friends. You're falling in love.
Yes, yes,
You
yes.
have a beautiful career.
Yes, I
And
do.
then you write this zine.
Mm.
So you wrote and published a zine called How a Photo and Video Sharing Social Networking Service Gave Me My Best Friends, True Love, a Beautiful Career, and Made Me Want to Die.
Gets me every time.
It's evocative for sure. Can you take us back to when you were writing that? Like, what was coming up for you during that period that led to you writing the scene?
I want to say that was maybe around the time that like stories had really started happening, or I maybe just started using them more. And I think really for me as a user of the app Instagram, when stories got introduced and the algorithm changed so that it wasn't consistent, is when I really got hooked. And, I use, just for anyone listening, if you don't know, like, I am someone who has a couple different mental health diagnoses and struggles with suicidal ideation sometimes. And so like the sentence like made me want to die wasn't like a joke, or like, even though I kind of giggle after it's said because it does sound so Gemini and dramatic of me. And I've also been sober from alcohol for 13 years. Lucky 13, feeling grateful for that. But there are some mirrorings that happen for me using Instagram and my addiction to alcohol. And so it had started sort of triggering some of those same feelings of like, I can't put this down, I can't take breaks. But like my girlfriend at the time slipped into my DMs, it like a lot of my friends I made because I was hosting them. Like I think of like Ellen Rutt, who's now one of my best friends and collaborators and made the cover of Getting to Center, my book. Like we literally met on Instagram, and finding these different important relationships, both work relationships and personal relationships, especially, I was living in California at the time in a small rural town. I now live in northern Michigan in a small rural town. And so social media really becomes this sort of like tether to me to the outside world and to culture and to community. And so I wrote this zine sort of, it's just sort of a long-winded essay, really, that's just sort of like, here are all the reasons I love using this, and here are the reasons that it's really hurting my mental health. So yeah, that was sort of what was going on at the time when I made it.
Let's fast forward then to 2021, which I believe, or maybe late 2020, is when you launched the planetarium portal. And this is definitely when I witnessed you go through a whole process around taking an Instagram break. So you did a lot of writing about this. You shared documentation of how you were planning your break. I actually have in front of me this like 7-step process you wrote out. And the things that you talked about, I mean, I can just see so clearly how this shaped Off the Grid, even though it wasn't really in the front of my mind for years until yesterday.
Yeah.
When I found it on my Google Drive, which I also love, like pre-Substack, right? You had a Patreon and you were sharing Google Docs. Like,
Yes, I love a document. Honestly, I want to get back into Google Docs. Like Notion's fine, but like Google Docs, I love to highlight a heading with the light. And there it is. Amelia is holding it up, and the headings are highlighted with pastel colors.
yeah. So just to like bring listeners along with us in this document that I'm looking at, like you talk about how you're planning for your break and you have these steps. I'll just share them briefly. Step 1, I hired someone. Step 2, I started a radio show. Step 3, I started a Patreon. Step 4, I had a book come out. And underneath that, in all caps, many times, is Instagram is not a business plan. Step 5, I invented an online class. Step 6, I deepened my fundraising practice. Step 7, I told people I was leaving and where to find me.
I'm like, sorry, I have to get off the call and go integrate the steps. I guess they already are written. I don't know what I'm waiting for.
Yeah, I think looking back at this, I'm just curious, like, what made it feel so important to take a break then? And also, what made you feel like I've got to start documenting and sharing this?
I think my job description really since 2015, like when I wrote How to Not Always Be Working as a zine, which was in 2015. So for almost the last 10 years, I really feel like my job has been to like make a mess and tell the people about the mess and tell them how I'm in the mess or how I got through the mess, and just not be afraid of looking dumb. It's not that I post things and think, "Oh, I'm really confident in this, and this doesn't look stupid at all." I'm like, "I can't believe I still have to talk about my Instagram addiction." Like, it's definitely like that's kind of the little voice. But I think with that break, everyone was burnt out at the end of 2020, but I think I had put a book out. I put Getting to Center out the week before the presidential election, and it just kind of got lost in the mix of things. And I was just tired of using Instagram and seeing Instagram, and I really did feel the pressure to, like, perform and perform correctly in that space in a way that I felt like was sort of blocking me from, like, some of my true movement and activism work. And I'll say I deactivated for 4 months. I didn't just take a break. So, I do love also talking about the difference between, like, logging off, hiring someone else, deactivating. I mean, deactivating is my greatest pleasure. To truly not exist there is so pleasurable for me. When, like, this kind of avatar of me exists in the space, it's really easy for me to just log back in and take it back.
Yeah.
Something I want to flag that you talk about so beautifully is sort of like the different things we need to not be on social media. And one of them is like the channel to share, because that's what you're really losing is like the channel between you and your audience, readers, students, customers, whoever it is. And so I think that's why I really laid out like, okay, I have a radio show now. You can listen to me on the radio once a week. You can read my book. And most importantly, you can come over to the Patreon where I'll be active and I'll be sharing. And it was really successful. A lot of people signed up for that Patreon. And I had my newsletter and my Patreon, and I was just sort of like double working, which is when I moved everything over to Substack and took a huge pay cut. I mean, it was drastic and scary. And I have since like built that income back up that it is now more than what it was on Patreon. But it was another kind of scary jump to be like, this actually doesn't feel like the right place for this project or thing anymore. I'm going to move over to this other platform. So yeah, I think what was really important about that deactivation time and that experiment, those 4 months totally away, was it was really important to have another place for the people to engage with me, which is why I'm so passionate about talking about newsletters, because I love my newsletter. I love having a newsletter. I always have loved having a newsletter. And it's why I can not use social media, like just period.
Yeah, I really always appreciated the sorts of distinctions that you've drawn between like I'm not using social media, but I am still sharing online. Like you're not leaving your digital worlds. In fact, you're just kind of you relocated them through this shift from Instagram to Patreon and then to Substack.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you got much more direct access to the people that you were communicating with and things of that nature. But before we go right to talking about platforms, which I do want to do, I want to take us to one more step on your social media journey, which is more recent. So last fall, you left Instagram again. What led you to leave and then what brought you back, roughly 6 months later?
It was September and it just felt bad. It just felt bad to be there. There was nothing. It honestly actually reminds me of when I quit drinking, that like the last time I drank wasn't actually even that crazy. I was just like in the mental obsession so deeply that I was like, I don't think normal drinkers have this much mental obsession. I don't think they wake up and think about their next drink. And that was like a flagged to me about wanting to quit drinking. And so it is interesting that, I don't say I'm going to quit drinking forever. I say I don't drink today. Like that's it. Like I do not say I'm not going to drink tomorrow. And so it is interesting that with Instagram, I sometimes try to be very like, I'm going to do this for 4 months or I'm going to do this forever. And when I posted I quit Instagram forever, I think my next sentence was like, and who knows when I come out of retirement. Like I really love using the Michael Jordan metaphor of like, I'm going to win a bunch of championships, retire, come back, win a bunch of championships, and then also play baseball. Like, it's like, I love that and that sports energy of like, yeah, I'm going to leave, I'm going to come back, I'm going to change it up. And so I did think I was going to leave forever. I did actually think that. I really thought this is it. And I had a really successful last quarter of the year. I made more in the last quarter of last year than I had in any quarter in my business ever through my co-working, a writing class I taught with Faria Roshin and Anna Fusco, and then a sale I did on like a bundle of classes, all without any social media, just with my newsletter. I quit Instagram at that time, also right before October 7th. And then it was sort of interesting to see and hear from other people that in sort of like the activism space, social media felt difficult, or just like there was a lot of differing opinions and shaming, or like it was just maybe like a hard, intense place to be, which was interesting for me because I felt really clear in my politics in my newsletter, specifically around Palestine, and also felt the urgency of the moment without having to rush. Like I was really like, cool, every Monday I can weave this in a way that feels correct to me. And I don't have to find the right infographic or the right thing to post in my stories every day. And I felt way more available to really, at the end of the day, the people most affected. I mean, really what happened was I felt like it felt kind of weird that my Instagram was like there, but wasn't sharing some of my political beliefs. Like it felt like this weird digital holding place about me, but I think I'm trying to find a deeper way to say this, but like I wanted to post about Palestine was specifically why I started using Instagram again. And it's been a few months and I don't feel better or something. Like I don't know. I guess one might say because I have a large following, it maybe is making an impact, and people who follow me who maybe aren't as politically radical as I am are seeing what I'm sharing and they're like, "Whoa, cool. I want to look more into this and understand more about this." Like that's sort of the goal. Like I don't think that me posting a fundraiser necessarily means people click it and add to it, but my hope is that it brings some awareness of what's happening in Gaza right now. But I don't know if the impact really is any better than just using my newsletter. And I don't think that there's a way to measure or know that, but I'll just check in here that like my current relationship with Instagram and using it like doesn't feel good. I'm not having fun there. And I even used it to like share about a quilt class that I taught and something else. And like I kind of asked around at class and like no one signed up from seeing it on Instagram. Like everyone signed up from my newsletter. So in terms of my business functions without Instagram, and I don't think sharing on Instagram really helps my business. I do like posting when I'm on a podcast or when there's like a win. But in terms of like promoting my own stuff, I don't think it really even works anymore. And in terms of sharing my politics, I think it's fine. And I'd rather just stay more focused and clear in my newsletter. So that's kind of where I'm at with all of it today.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing sort of that push and pull in the path on your current like sharing ecosystem and how you're sharing and showing up online. I also appreciate how you highlight that you left Instagram, you had your most successful business quarter financially, and then you returned for more like personal and political reasons. And it seems to have very little impact on how well your business is doing, by which I guess we mean like how much money it's bringing in.
I would even argue to say I'm making less money than I usually do right now.
And do you feel that's somehow related to Instagram?
Absolutely. I think it absolutely is related to the level of distraction of using the app. And I feel distracted in the way that like, so before I really had like built these sort of patterns of like, I mostly get my news from Al Jazeera or Democracy Now! Shout out to Amy Goodman. If you ever listen to this, you're my hero. But, you know, my sort of like ritual was I listen to Democracy Now! Sometimes I listen to NPR up first. I kind of like do my little collections and then look at the other Substacks or newsletters I'm reading, maybe touch in with some friends to see what they're sharing, what they're reading, and then kind of integrate it into the newsletter. And when I'm on Instagram, if I start my day in the devastation of the world, I don't want to listen to the news. I don't want to think about stuff anymore. It burns me out really fast. And when we talk about like looking away, like, yes, there's a privilege in looking away, but I also think that we just have to be honest about our capacity. And I would much rather carve out an hour of time to look at, listen to, and think about what's happening in the world so that I can integrate it with my job if I want to. And the way Instagram shows me things, I mean, it's literally just like, here's dead children under rubble and here's a backpack to buy from Bagu. Like, the pace of that is so incredibly disorienting to me that it's like death, selling something, and then I have to post that I would also like to sell something, and then I mean, the other thing is like I have so many friends who share things on social media that aren't really covered in the news cycle. And so I do think that's where it is really powerful. It's a really powerful place to share information. I don't want to take away from that. When I think of Faria or my friend Tamara Santibáñez, like people in my life who are just amazing activists, like they really use social media to really spread information that is not commonly found other places. And I think that's why I got back on, was to do some of that same work, but I just maybe that's not my job, And I think that's okay. Like I think that's where like I don't know if that can be in my job description, and I'd like to think I can still make just as big of an impact in the world without it being a part of my job description. But yeah, it's also a privilege to have the reach that I do, and I like using it for good. And so, yeah, I think maybe that was it. I was like, oh, this like these tens of thousands of followers are just sitting there, and I could be like telling them things that are going on. But something that like Nicole Antoinette talks about so much is like the cost. Like, but what is at what cost of me being there? And like also me posting there but making less money, and then I'm stressed and like can't pay my back tax debt and I'm nervous about paying my mortgage next month. Like how does that gonna serve the collective? It's not.
I can relate so much to that sort of swirl or spiral of all of the pressures that we feel and desires that we feel to show up and to make an impact and to help create the world that we want to see and the world we want to live in. And I think that it's undeniable that social media shapes that. And that's part of why it can feel like we need to or want to or have to be present there and be saying certain things there. While at the same time, many of us within that practice start to realize that the platforms themselves are detrimental to those efforts. It's really challenging. Like, this is why there's no easy answer, right? This is why there's no formula. This is why this podcast exists, because of the both and of we to some degree need social media to learn that these things are happening, to see beyond the veils of mainstream media coverage. But also at this stage we've totally lost a lot of context for what we're looking at. We don't know where it's coming from. We don't know if it's real in the era of AI generated content and images and videos and voices. I don't think there's an easy answer to this. And that's part of why I appreciate your willingness to just show up and be like, well, I was off it because I felt bad. I'm on it and it feels bad. You're just kind of using different techniques. I want to say almost like you're just in like a different practice right now than you were then. And maybe where this is going for me is like, so you're saying like it still feels bad to be there. Like what are you orienting toward in your practice? Because for me, it is a lot of like pleasure and like what feels good and impactful. But what are you orienting toward in your practice that you feel like Instagram matters again right now?
I mean, that and I say this with no judgment to myself, just feels like what I'm orienting it to in my practice is completely out of alignment with being on Instagram. Like those don't match up. So that's just maybe a helpful answer to like, I'm not sure what's keeping me there, because what I'm orienting to really is like the dirt that got delivered for my flower beds and like the actions that are happening in my town and what's going on with my neighbors and what's happening at my studio with my 73-year-old studio mate and making quilts. It's like that's what I want to turn towards, and to turn toward grad school and just my art practice and my writing and my next book. And yeah, none of that includes Instagram, which I think is part of why I don't feel good right now, is because I'm turning towards that when there's sort of all these other things to really be turning towards. But it's interesting. Just, I really do think that the thing that Instagram is so good for is like mutual aid and finding information in that way. Like, I needed to move my camper into this little spot and post it on Instagram yesterday. And sure enough, my like new neighbor who I met at the like Up North Pride fundraiser a couple weeks ago was like, I have a truck, I can move your camper, and like came over. And I maybe could have thought, I wonder if Jasmine has a truck, and texted her, but like I really posted it on Instagram and found the answer. So I think in some ways it's like there's like, it's fun sometimes. It's fun to go in there and see what everybody's up to. But yeah, I think in general, when I really ask myself, like, what is my practice right now? What do I want to be prioritizing? Instagram has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's just coming to me right now is like, after you say you quit forever, how do you take a break again or something? It's like I'm really addicted to the quitting forever. It's like I feel like I keep waiting to quit again because I need to be able to quit forever.
Hmm.
I don't know what that is. Any therapists on the line? Psychoanalysis people want to chime in?
My armchair analyst inside of me is like, yeah, there's a dopamine rush in quitting, just the same way there is a dopamine rush in engaging.
Yes, God, absolutely. Yes. The thought of quitting makes me feel high. I'm like, that sounds amazing. Like I would be free again.
Yeah.
I feel like I haven't heard this on Off the Grid, so I'm just going to be honest. Like I also get hooked into like wanting to see what people are doing.
Yeah.
Straight up. Like I'm like, what's my ex up to? What's that person I have a crush on up to? What's this hot skater girl doing today? What are my friends posting about Palestine or Sudan or anywhere? Like both in the like of service things, what are people up to? But also in the just like in the social fabric, like what's everybody up to? I want to know. I mean, that's some Venus and Gemini shit, maybe, but it's like, I'm trying to find out what people are up to. Who's single? I'm single living in the woods. I'm not trying to not know who's single. But yeah, it's like, I want to be honest about that hook for me, especially living rurally in Michigan. I'm like, what is everybody doing? I'm supposed to not know what everybody's doing today. But even looking back at that time when I was off for 6 months, I had a great time. I found plenty of people to hang out with and didn't care what anybody was doing. And the people who I really wanted to know what they were doing, I would just text them. But that hooks me. That hooks me in. I'll be honest.
Yeah, I think that's very real, especially, I don't know if I've said this publicly before, but like, I don't think I could have moved to Nebraska if I wasn't partnered. And I don't know if I would have stayed off social media if I wasn't in this like healthy, securely attached, beautiful partnership. And I think that's very real.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Congrats, first of all.
Thanks. It was a journey. These are some of the things I also think people don't talk about enough. Like there is a social isolation to leaving social media when your whole community uses it. Like that's a piece of it. Who has the flexibility and space and support to isolate themselves in that way? What does that require? Are you feeling fed up, burned out, or totally sick of social media? Are you wondering if your business might be able to be successful without it? Or if your creative work would still find its way out in the world without you posting it on Instagram or TikTok every 10 minutes? If you can relate to any of these musings of mine, I want to invite you to join me in the interweb. The Interweb is an annual membership for creatives, artists, small business owners, freelancers, influencers, entrepreneurs, and creators who want support sharing their work and making money without social media. When you join, you get access to on-demand courses taught by biz friends across the internet and quarterly live events with me, Amelia. If you love this podcast, I hope that you'll head to the show notes to learn more and sign up so that I really can see you off the grid and on the interweb. Now let's get back into today's episode. Something else I'm really interested in, especially with some of the friends and peers you've mentioned, Nicole Antoinette, Anna Fusco, Freya Rasheen, Tamara Santibanez, I think of these as all folks who have, to me, I'll be really vulnerable here, enviable artistic careers. People that I look to and I'm like, yes, please, more of this. Also for me.
Yes. Yes.
And, I see not all of them, but most of them still present on social media, navigating these platforms in their own ways. And, I think part of what's enviable to me is the shaping of a career and a really different sort of path that pulls in a lot of different things. And so I guess I just want to ask, what is the shape of your career right now? And does your return to Instagram fit into that in any way?
I love this. Well, and I think some of the friends I just mentioned or that you just mentioned, I share with them this crossover of we are artists running business who are also public people. I struggle to use the word public figure. It sounds too fancy or something, but you might know those people's names and vibes before you're thinking about their business structure. It's you don't necessarily look at Cody Cook-Parrott and think the business they run. So one thing that is interesting to me is that is, I think, a benefit of social media. And part of why I use it is I love how you can kind of look there and pretty quickly understand who I am, my politics, my projects, and what I'm up to. In the same way that I feel I've been thinking a lot lately about updating my website to be a little clearer in that way. If you went to my website right now, you might not even know I was non-binary. I don't even know if my pronouns are on there or something. It's there's just little things that because we all relied so heavily on Instagram, it just became the place where you kind of put everything, which is scary because you don't own it and it could go away at any time and it's not a website. And so as the algorithm shows your work to less and less people. So if you're listening, get a newsletter, update your website. But, I think that is part of the shaping is in the same way that writing is how I understand myself. I do think that sharing on Instagram is how I understand myself. And my newsletter sort of is that, but it is a really different energy. So yeah, shaping my creative ecosystem right now includes Instagram for sharing wins in my career and political things that feel important to me. And then outside of that, I don't think I'll use it to promote my next class sort of thing. But yeah, I'm thinking about it right now because I am teaching this class in June, The Shapes of Our Offerings, which I taught last year as well. And it's sort of thinking about what is the shape of the ecosystem. And I think a big question to ask is how does Instagram fit into that? Or does it not? And does it need to?
Yeah.
And that brings me to something we've talked about a little bit, but just this if I was just running a business, I think I would maybe have an easier time just being I'm going to leave social media. But I think the public person, author part of it makes it different or something. And I know that there's people who identify that way and still get off social media. But I think in terms of back to the kind of shaping, it's yeah, I use social media to shape my public figureness and I want to be there. And I'm about to sell my next book to a publisher. And I purposefully am not deactivated right now. It's like my Instagram is up right now, and a lot of the book is about divesting from Instagram, and I'm curious how writing it will impact my usage of it. And thinking about it coming out in a year or 2, it's hard to say. It's like, is my publisher gonna push me to use it? And I think that's the big question for a lot of people who wanna leave, and that stops people is book writing and book deals, and just the reality that you're more apt to get one if you have an active social media account, which I think is too bad and not representative of if writing is any good or not. But kind of to answer maybe lots of different questions that you asked today is also on my mind, is just like getting this next book deal and then asking myself, will I use it while I write the book? Can I stay off of it while I write the book? Will I use it when the book comes out? I think are big questions I'm asking myself.
So something we touched on at the beginning of the conversation that I want to bring back now is sort of the platform supremacy, as I've been thinking of it, in our marketing ecosystems. And I'm curious for your perspective on the shift from Instagram to Substack. Like, what do you feel is similar or different between those two platforms? I mean, especially because Substack has changed a lot since you first landed there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as of right now.
I think the thing that feels the most similar is the metrics, like that there's metrics in the way that when my newsletter was I used to just host it with MailChimp. There was no likes, there was no comments, there was no resharing. Yeah, and so I don't really pay much attention to, like, open rates and unsubscribes. Like, out of all the dopamine things and addiction things, for some reason, have been spared caring about those. But I do notice I get hooked on the likes sometimes. Like, I'm like, "Oh, that must have not really hit." The newsletter where I announced my name change, has a ton of likes and shares, or the one that I announced I was leaving Instagram as my most popular newsletter. With Instagram, it works the same way where I feel like I make a post or write something and I'm just like, this is it. This is brilliant. This is really going to reach the people. And then like 10 people see it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I think it's not devoid of like those parts of the brain loops of just, am I liked? Do they like me? Did I do a good job? And so it really requires this same kind of just like detachment. And I think just like real commitment and trust with the work, and that like the people who need it will receive it. I've tried to use Notes a little bit, which is Substack's social media, kind of like Twitter, and it just doesn't really like land for me. It's also just sort of like the writers of Substack talking to each other, and I think that's also like not what I care about. Like when I joined Substack, it was very much like, here is a newsletter provider that you can turn paid on. It was that simple. And I was like, perfect. That's exactly what I want. And I always just called it a newsletter. Like I didn't realize it was going to become like Substack, the platform where we're talking to other Substack people and there's check marks and the check marks, your subscriber count is public. I think you can actually turn that off.
You can't turn it off.
Yeah, I could turn the solid orange check mark off, but why would I do that when it looks so fancy? It's like, it's that kind of shit that just both sucks and I guess I'm grateful for because it works in my favor. But yeah, I definitely have moments where my income is so dependent on Substack at this point, which again is a huge privilege and was the goal, is to get to have a job as a writer is so amazing. And sometimes it's confusing because I also have a job as a teacher of writing and quilting. And sometimes I just miss the like Flowdesk email marketing separate from Substack. And so I do use Flowdesk separately to email people who are my past students or have downloaded my lead magnet, the creative ideation portal. but it's not so streamlined and can be a little clunky sometimes. There's a lot of imperfections of Substack that make me frustrated with, yeah, it's not the same as when I started using it. So
Yeah. Like now people will say like I have a Substack, not I have a newsletter. And also in the same way that like people will now ask you about Substack, whereas like in the past, like who would have asked you about MailChimp?
exactly.
And I think this is really where Substack is trying to be a platform or also an app as opposed to being an email service provider, which is just a very different thing. And, MailChimp, Flowdesk, those are email service providers. You are paying for a service, they provide a service. Substack is trying to do something else. And its promise is discoverability and pay. And I know to some degree, I mean, it seems like you've benefited from Substack discoverability and your newsletter has grown significantly since moving it there.
Yeah, I think I looked the other day, and from recommendations alone, so other newsletters recommending Monday, I have gotten 14,000 subscribers.
Wow.
And I'm really grateful for that. I think that is huge, but what I'll also say, and this is where it's like, what is a newsletter versus what is email marketing, which I love to talk about and how they go together and how they're separate. But it's like my numbers for my classes. Well, my writing class, actually, the numbers went up exponentially of how many people signed up. But for most of what I do, most of my other offerings, I haven't seen from an 8,000 person list to a 29,000 person list, that hasn't equaled that same times amount of people signing up for what I do. Because a lot of them just want to read the newsletter. They just want to read the essay. They just are there for, the project that is Monday. And some people are there to get the information about the next class. And so that's another, just I could talk about that all day, but it's just like another dance to play in the newsletter marketing, shaping, offering platform dance that we have to do.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, like, even if your list has tripled or quadrupled or more in size, it doesn't mean that your client base has grown at that same rate. And with the proliferation of Substacks, I think there is a dilution of the power of the email to some degree. People's inboxes are fuller than ever. Quote unquote, everyone has a newsletter. And how does that? It may mean that we need more subscribers to hit the same number of sales from our lists.
And this is something that someone was asking me the other day of just like, the question of, is it too late to join Substack? And I definitely think the answer is no. And I think there is a reality in the saturation of it. But that is where I can't tell if it's just because I'm looking at notes and I'm like, who the fuck are all these people? Like, I literally am like, who are these writers who they're showing me, who, just for anyone listening, if you've never looked, it's like they show you a feed that are not people you follow or subscribe to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just this really weird experience and it's like, it's a lot of people talking about Substack on Substack, which, I've done that too. I've talked about Instagram on Instagram, and it's like circular in this way that it just doesn't feel very radical. I'm like, who curated this list of people for me? Because it's not very exciting. And I try to remember that, again, and I call it my newsletter. My newsletter goes into people's inboxes. 97% of the people who read my newsletter, I don't think have ever even looked at substack.com. Like, they're not in the app, they're not on the website, they're just getting an email newsletter still. And that's what is important to me. And so I try to remember that they don't really care where it comes from. They're not like Substack. They're just like, oh, Cody has a newsletter and it goes in my inbox. I guess if they pay for it, they have to kind of figure it out.
Yeah, no, I think this is also what happens on Notes is like it's a very insular community. And then it can be really easy to be convinced that Substack's all about the app. But from every reference point I've seen, like the vast majority of people who subscribe to Substack newsletters are just getting the emails in their inbox. They're not engaging with the app or reading
Yeah.
on the app or being in notes. That's like where the people writing Substacks are hanging out, not where the people reading them are hanging out, which is an important distinction if we run a business or just trying to share with the people.
And notes is where I posted that I changed my name and couldn't find someone to help me change my Instagram handle, and someone there saw it who I didn't know, who didn't subscribe to my newsletter, who my note popped up in his feed, and he was like, "I have a contact." And I literally like couldn't change my handle. It was just my old name, and I don't know how I would have ever figured it out. So another example of
Internet magic.
it worked one time.
It happens everywhere, even in places we feel ambivalent about. I think what I'm taking away from this conversation is the way that social media has become a really integral part of how many of us construct our sense of self and relate to ourselves and others. And I think that that can be a neutral thing. Like, I think we can use social media for self construction in ways that are playful and magical and allow parts of us to be seen that have never been witnessed in any other area of our life. And simultaneously, I think that when we turn to Instagram or TikTok or any social media platform for recognition and connection, we can be met with rejection and betrayal and taken really far away from ourselves and lose ourselves in that process. But at the end of the day, I think social media is a technology like many other technologies we use to understand ourselves. And it's all part of this dance that you've been describing for us. And I know I'll be just reflecting on many of these like themes and ideas for sure weeks and months and years and like the rest of my life to come.
Yeah, that was such a beautiful summary of what we talked about. I feel like that's what I'm coming away with too, is this. Instead of using the word dance, because I use it so much, I've been replacing it with waltz lately. I'm like, yeah, because it does feel like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's like I'm in and I'm out, and I'm in and I'm out. And my dance mentors, the architects, when we make a dance together, we all stand on the perimeter of the room together in a big circle, and you enter the circle when you're part of the dance. You go in. But what we say is when you're in, you're in. And when you're out, you're in. It's about holding the like deep, deep presence for whoever's in. You're always ready. You're always ready for what the dance needs. Am I going to go in? And another like question that we ask is it more generous to go in, or is it more generous to stay out? And so I think that framework is really what I'm using even when I use social media, is like, is it more generous for me to post the infographic today, or is it more generous for me to not add to this today and to save it for Monday's newsletter, or to save it for a conversation with a friend? And when I'm out, I'm in still. I'm holding it all still, and the less I'm on there, the more my capacity strengthens to hold it all. So that's what I'll say.
When we're in, we're in. And when we're out, we're in. I love that so much. To wrap us up, I would just love if you could share, like, how can people tap into your creative ecosystem right now?
Yes. Well, if you're listening to this like the day or two when it comes out, I'm teaching the shapes of our offerings, which is kind of my like mini art business class. And that is 3 Saturdays in June, the 8th, 15th, and 22nd, with 2 co-working times. So I would love to see people in class. Sliding scale, scholarships, payment plans. I love to work with people. Come on over. You can subscribe to Monday, which is my newsletter that's free every Monday at codycookparrott.substack.com. And if you're into praying every day, I actually started a new newsletter called Ordinary Practice, where I send out a prayer every day for the next year. It just started. And then I'm going to self-publish them into like a daily prayer book next summer solstice 2025. So those are sort of my main places. I would say, I guess you could follow Cody Cook-Parrott on Instagram, but even by the time this comes out, I might have disappeared again. So don't count on finding me there, but I do exist there. And snail mail, P.O. Box 252, Cedar, Michigan 49621. Those are my places you can find me.
Thank you, Cody, for bringing us all of this wisdom, for reminding us that we can have a business without social media.
Yes, you can.
But we can still use social media for other reasons if we so choose. And it's all a part of our freedom and liberation portals that we're traveling through, hopefully together.
Yes. Freedom and liberation portals that we're traveling through together. I just wanted to say that again for myself.
I can't wait to have you back on when this new book is out in the world so we can discover everything that comes up as you're writing more about your digital public sharing practice. Listeners, you can find links to everything Cody does on the internet in the show notes. And thank you for joining us for this conversation. Until next time, we will see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really